Chapter 30 of Initials Only. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Initials Only by Anna Catherine Green. Book 3, The Heart of Man. Chapter 30. Chaos. It is not difficult to understand Mr. Challoner's feelings, or even those of Doris, at the moment of Mr. Brotherson's departure. But why this change in Brotherson himself? Why this sense of something new and terrible rising between him and the suddenly beclouded future? Let us follow him to his lonely hotel room and see if we can solve the puzzle. But first, does he understand his own trouble? He does not seem to, for when, his hat thrown aside, he stops, erect and frowning under the flaring gas jet he had no recollection of lighting, his first act was to lift his hand to his head in a gesture of surprising helplessness for him, while snatches of broken sentences fell from his lips, among which could be heard, "What has come to me? Undone in an hour, doubly undone. First by a face, and then by this thought which surely the devils have whispered to me. Mr. Challoner and Oswald. What is the link between them? Great God, what is the link? Not myself. Who then, or what?" Flinging himself into a chair, he buried his face in his hands. There were two demons to fight. The first in the guise of an angel. Doris. Unknown yesterday, unknown an hour ago, but now... Had there ever been a day, an hour, where she had not been as the very throb of his heart, the light of his eyes, and the crown of all imaginable blisses? He was startled at his own emotion as he contemplated her image in his fancy, and listened for the lost echo of the few words she had spoken. Words so full of music when they referred to his brother, so hard and cold when she simply addressed himself. This was no passing admiration of youth for a captivating woman. This was not even the love he had given to Edith Challoner. This was something springing full-born out of nothing, a force which, for the first time in his life, made him complacent to the natural weaknesses of man. A dream and yet a reality strong enough to blot out the past, remake the present, change the aspect of all his hopes, and outline a new fate. He did not know himself. There was nothing in his whole history to give him an understanding of such feelings as these. Can a man be seized, as it were, by the hair, and swung up on the slopes of paradise or down the steeps of hell, without a forewarning, without the chance even to say whether he wished such a cataclysm in his life or no? He, Orlando Brotherson, had never thought much of love. Science had been his mistress, ambition his lodestar. Such feeling as he had acknowledged to had been for men, struggling men, men who were downtrodden and gasping in the narrow bounds of poverty and helplessness. Miss Challoner had roused, his pride. He could see that now. The might of this new emotion made plain many things he had passed by as useless, puerile, unworthy of a man of mental calibre and might. He had never loved Edith Challoner at any moment of their acquaintanceship, though he had been sincere in thinking that he did. Doris's beauty, the hour he had just passed with her, had undeceived him. Did he hail the experience? It was not likely to bring him joy. This young girl, whose image floated in light before his eyes, would never love him. She loved his brother. He had heard their names mentioned together before he had even been in town an hour. Oswald, the cleverest man, Doris, the most beautiful girl in western Pennsylvania. He had accepted the gossip then. He had not seen her, and it all seemed very natural, hardly worth a moment's thought. But now... And here the other demon sprang erect and grappled with him before the first one had let go his hold. Oswald and Challoner! The secret, unknown something which had softened that hard man's eye when his brother's name was mentioned. He had noted it and realized the mystery, a mystery before which sleep and rest must fly, a mystery to which he must now give his thought, whatever the cost, whatever the loss to those heavenly dreams the magic of which was so new it seemed to envelope him in the balm of paradise. Away then, image of light! Let the faculties thou hast days act again. There is more than fate's caprice in Challoner's interest in a man he never saw. Ghosts of old memories rise and demand a hearing. Facts, trivial and commonplace enough to have been lost in oblivion with the day which gave them birth, throng again from the past, proving that naught dies without a possibility of resurrection. Their power over this brooding man is shown by the force with which his fingers crush against his bowed forehead. Oswald and Challoner! Had he found the connecting link? Had it been? Could it have been Edith? The preposterous is sometimes true. Could it be true in this case? He recalled the letters read to him as hers in that room of his in Brooklyn. He had hardly noted them then, he was so sure of their being forgeries gotten up by the police to mislead him. Could they have been real, the effusions of her mind, the breathings of her heart, directed to an actual O.B., and that O.B. his brother? They had not been meant for him. He had read enough of the mawkish lines to be sure of that. None of the allusions fitted in with the facts of their mutual intercourse. But they might with those of another man. They might with the possible acts and affections of Oswald, whose temperament was wholly different from his, and who might have loved her, should it ever be shown that they had met and known each other. And this was not an impossibility. Oswald had been east. Oswald had even been in the Berkshires before himself. Oswald... Why, it was Oswald who had suggested that he should go there. Go where she still was. Why this second coincidence if there were no tie, if the Challoners and Oswald were as far apart as they seemed, and as conventionalities would naturally place them? Oswald was a sentimentalist, but very reserved about his sentimentalities. If these suppositions were true, he had had a sentimentalist's motive for what he did. As Orlando realized this, he rose from his seat, aghast at the possibilities confronting him from this line of thought. Should he contemplate them? Risk his reason by dwelling on a supposition which might have no foundation in fact? No, his brain was too full, his purposes too important for any unnecessary strain to be put upon his faculties. No thinking. Investigation first. Mr. Challoner should be able to settle this question. He would see him. Even at this late hour he ought to be able to find him in one of the rooms below, and, by the force of an irresistible demand, learn in a moment whether he had to do with a mere chimera of his own overwrought fancy, or with a fact which would call into play all the resources of a hitherto unconquered and undaunted nature. There was a wood fire burning in the sitting-room that night, and around it was grouped a number of men with their papers and pipes. Mr. Brotherson, entering, naturally looked that way for the man he was in search of, and was disappointed not to find him there, but on casting his glances elsewhere, he was relieved to see him standing in one of the windows overlooking the street. His back was to the room, and he seemed to be lost in a fit of abstraction. As Orlando crossed to him, he had time to observe how much whiter was this man's head than in the last interview he had held with him in the coroner's office in New York. But this evidence of grief in one with whom he had little, if anything, in common, neither touched his feelings nor deterred his step. The awakening of his heart to new and profound emotions had not softened him towards the sufferings of others, if those others stood without the pale he had previously raised as the legitimate boundary of a just man's sympathies. He was, as I have said, an extraordinary specimen of manly vigour in body and in mind, and his present